this is Short Stories, and I'm your host, Martin. Today's short story is based on the work of Mary Ann Evans, aka George Eliot. She was an English novelist and poet who lived from 1819 to 1880. She wrote 7 novels, the most famous of which is called Middlemarch. Thanks to the BBC, that story is now world famous. However, I did not choose to retell one of Eliot's novels. Instead, I chose to retell one of her short stories, Brother Jacob. It's a tale about greed, empire, and sugar. Enjoy! Vocabulary: confectioner, confectioner. I ordered a cake from the local confectioner. Big shot, big shot. After I get a promotion, I'll become a big shot at this company. Emigrate, emigrate. Many Irish people immigrated to the U.S. during the 1840s. Indulge, indulge. The old woman loved to indulge her grandkids by giving them candy. Banal, banal. I'm tired of reading banal old stories. Ruckus, ruckus. I heard a ruckus outside last night, so I called the police. Fraud, fraud. You can't trust him because he is a fraud. Talk smack about someone. Talk smack about someone. The red team started talking smack about the blue team. The story. Of all the bad career choices that a young man can make, perhaps the worst one is the confectionery business. For David Foe, the decision to become a confectioner was a colossal mistake. When David was young, he spent a lot of time with his uncle. The uncle was a baker for a local nobleman, which gave David the false impression that his uncle was some kind of big shot. In reality, a confectioner is not a well-respected member of the community, nor is he likely to have any meaningful influence or social standing. David did not know this, so when it came time for him to choose an apprenticeship, he unhesitatingly chose to be apprenticed to his uncle. It didn't take David long to figure out that maybe he had made a mistake. Being a confectioner was not all fun and games like he had expected. He had to wake up extra early to start the ovens and bake the cakes. It was hot and dusty work. What's more, he found his ambitions for fame and riches unmet. I deserve better than this, David said to himself. A confectioner's life is a very common and average one, but I am clearly above average. Even before his apprenticeship was finished, he hatched a plan that he thought would allow him to reach his full potential. It is very common for an ambitious and inexperienced young man who finds himself stymied in his own country to look abroad for opportunity. Such was the case with David Foe. He examined his limited knowledge of geography in search of a country where a pale, round young man with stumpy hair could find a station that he deserved. Licking the sugar off of his fat, stubby fingers reminded him of the West Indies, so he decided that was where he would go. Immigrating overseas is not a small undertaking. It requires grit, discipline, and above all, money. To get the necessary money, David came up with a devilish scheme to steal from his own mother's savings. Of course, David was not completely without conscience. He questioned himself for a minute about what he was about to do. Two voices debated in his head, a prosecutor accusing him of vile treachery, and a defender who cobbled together some excuses. In the end, the defense won. "It's not robbery to take property belonging to your mother," David reasoned. "She won't prosecute you." On Sunday morning, David snuck into his mother's room while she was at church. He removed the coins from the box that she hid under her bed and carefully put them in a canvas bag. All was going well, and David was feeling very proud of himself for being so sneaky and clever when, out of nowhere, his younger brother Jacob appeared. "What you doin', big brother?" asked Jacob. David was so shocked by his brother's sudden appearance that he dropped his bag, spilling the coins on the ground. Fortunately, David was a quick thinker. He reached inside his pocket and pulled out some candy. "I brought you some of this, little brother," he said while extending his hand. Now, there is something you must know about Jacob. In the Victorian era, people such as Jacob were called idiots. Today, we call them people with learning disabilities. David did not much like his idiot brother, but he had no choice but to indulge him on this occasion. He used sweet words and sweet candy to bribe Jacob into silence. "It's working," thought David as Jacob took the candy and ignored the coins. David sighed with relief, and the next day he succeeded in his mission to run away to the West Indies. He got on a boat in Liverpool and set sail with the pilfered pennies. 6 years had passed since David disappeared. No one knew where he went. Meanwhile, the banal little village of Grimworth, England, began to grow. Trade with the West Indies brought new opportunities and new people. This also meant a brisk business for the local shopkeepers. It didn't take long for the vacant shop on the town square to be rented out to a newcomer. The newcomer, a pale-faced gentleman from the West Indies, opened a bakery with much fanfare. At first, the locals were suspicious of this outsider, as most people from small towns are. But the children of the town loved this shop. They could buy all kinds of brightly colored sweets and pastries. Eventually, the ladies of the town warmed up to the new shopkeeper, who was called Edward Freely. Mr. Freely soon became a popular figure in the town. He made friends with the social elite, the rector's wife, the town doctor, as well as other businessmen. Many of the local housewives, weary from cooking, overcame their aversion to taking a shortcut and began regularly purchasing dinner at Mr. Freely's shop. This only increased his popularity and his wealth. Some women stopped cooking entirely and instead spent great sums of money on imported meats and cheeses. This may have been a relief to some husbands, as their wives were rather poor cooks, but for others, this was a financial disaster. As for the children, of course they loved Mr. Freely's shop, and Mr. Freely loved his young customers. He even set up a cart near the school. He sold them candy, cake, tarts, pies, and so much sugar. Soon their little teeth began to rot, and their bellies grew round. As you can imagine, a man with this much social standing and financial success can't stay single for long. He was soon engaged to be married to a socially comparable lady named Penny Palfrey. Penny's mother came by the shop to discuss wedding arrangements. The discussion soon turned to Mr. Freely's family. "Will your family be attending the wedding?" asked Mrs. Palfrey. "Sadly, no. My family have mostly thought themselves too high to take any notice of me," replied Mr. Freely. Suddenly, he heard an extraordinary disturbance in the shop. It sounded like a heavy animal stomping about angrily. Mr. Freely anxiously ran into his shop and discovered the source of the ruckus. It was Jacob! Before Mr. Freely could say anything, Jacob ran up to him and hugged him tightly. "It's Big Brother Davy!" shouted Jacob with joy. Mr. Freely turned cold and his heart jumped. "Who is this?" asked Mrs. Palfrey. Jacob supplied the answer. "I'm Jacob, and this is my big bro, Davy." Mr. Freely tried to act natural and said, "I don't know what he is talking about. He must be drunk." "No," responded Jacob. "I'm not drunk. I'm Jacob. You're Davy. You came back. You're home." Mrs. Palfrey became very curious and started questioning Jacob. Mr. Freely tried to distract her, but was constantly interrupted by Jacob. Mrs. Palfrey began to see a resemblance between Jacob and Mr. Freely. Soon, the other people who happened to be in the shop at the time began taking a closer look at the two men. Mr. Freely heard the crowd murmuring. A woman said, "That's Jacob Foe. Didn't he have a brother named David?" The man standing next to her said, "Didn't David Foe go missing 6 years ago?" Another man chimed in. "A cousin of mine said he saw him board a boat for the West Indies." It didn't take people long to put two and two together. Mr. Freely's true identity as David Foe was uncovered. After David Foe was revealed to be a fraud, the people of Grimworth quickly turned on him. Penny Palfrey broke off her engagement with him. The respectable ladies stopped inviting him to tea, and the local businessmen started talking smack about him at meetings. It was no surprise then that his business began to fail, as no decent person in the town would shop there. David left Grimworth the next month. No one is quite sure where he went, but in his absence, the housewives began to cook again, the children lost weight, and some families had more money in their pockets than before. Questions. Number 1. What did David want? A. To gain high status and wealth. B. To become a butcher. C. To help his idiot brother. D. To give money to the poor. The answer is A. To gain high status and wealth. Question 2. What was David's plan? A. To raise money for charity. B. To borrow money to start a bakery. C. To steal money to immigrate. D. To earn enough money for a cake. The answer is C. To steal money to immigrate. Question 3. Who uncovered David's secret? A. Jacob. B. Penny. C. Edward. D. His mother. The answer is A. Jacob. Question 4. Who was Mr. Freely really? A. Jacob. B. Edward. C. David. D. Grimworth. The answer is C. David.